Hey everybody, Alan here. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of the PT on Ice Daily Show. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment and talk about Jane, our show sponsor. Jane offers a PCI compliant solution called Jane Payments that's designed to bring convenience to your day-to-day payments. That means payment options that are made for a quick and easy checkout experience for both you and your clients and patients. With Jane Payments, you can save time by collecting payments before an appointment with an online booking payment policy or requesting patients or clients keeping a card on file through your online intake form automatically built into Jane. You can also use the integrated Jane payment system at the Jane terminal to tap, insert, or swipe credit cards in person and have an option to then store that card on file through the terminal for quicker checkout at future appointments. And all that is naturally built into the Jane software. To see Jane Payments in action, head on over to jane.app/payments, and don't forget, you can use the promo code ICEPT1MO for a 1-month free grace period on your new Jane account. Enjoy today's show.
All right, looks like we are rolling. Sweet deal. Okay, guys, my name is Dr. Matthew Keister. I am hosting today's episode of the PT on Ice Daily Show. Today is Friday. That means it's Fitness Athlete Friday. Today we've got a little endurance athlete takeover. So, Fridays are tough, especially when you're following up Jeff when he's rapping on a Leadership Thursday. But it's even tougher today after what he did yesterday with 30 minutes of Q&A like the old school days. That was awesome. So if you haven't checked that one out, go back. He answered a lot of great questions and it was a super useful podcast. As we go forward, I've got a couple of housekeeping things that I want to run through, and then I'll get into some of the meat and potatoes of the day. First and foremost, Bike Fit Crew, we're going to be on the road a lot in the next few weeks. We've got upcoming courses here in Chicago this weekend. We're heading down there actually right after this. It's going to be a fun trip. Going to be a muscle and joint physical therapy right downtown. It's going to be beautiful. After that, 2 weeks from now, you can catch us in Bellingham, Washington. I believe that course is at capacity or pretty dang close. So if you're looking to get out that way, check it out now. And then we'll be back in the Midwest in early June 10th and 11th in Minnetonka, Minnesota. Really excited to be bringing a lot of courses to the Midwest as far as the biking community goes. As far as the points for today, so I mentioned the meat and potatoes. That was actually a pretty specific reference because what we're talking about today is Meals on Wheels. We are talking about fueling on the bike. So talking specifically about our cyclists and a few really key details that come with nutrition and being prepared for long rides and long time out on the bike. One of the first things that I want to dive into in this conversation is the fact that we cannot eat our way out of a dehydrated state. So if we're going to talk about nutrition and fuel and things on the bike, the number one thing that we have to have is an absolute standard across the board and an understanding that nutrition starts with hydration when it comes to performance. On the bike, every day you get out to go ride, you're going to have a couple of things that are going to change. The weather conditions are one of them, the intensity of the ride, and all of those things are going to kind of govern how much you need to refuel after. But what we can't change, or what we can change about our ecosystem is how on average, where our hydration level is at. So when we're talking to our patients, one of the key things we should be talking about is staying hydrated on a regular basis, because it doesn't happen overnight, and it certainly doesn't happen if you just bring a bottle on the ride and you're just like, yeah, I was slamming water, but then we realized the last 5 days you were only having 1 cup or 2 cups of water a day, not including your coffee. So starting with hydration is a big one. Now, I'm going to start getting into a few recommendations going here forward. And I realize that talking about nutrition, especially in the performance aspect, is dipping some toes into some controversial waters, some spaces where people are chock full of opinions and personal experiences. So my goal as I move forward with recommendations is to give you something that's actionable, something that you can actually have a conversation with your patient about, and then they can choose to expand on that or go down little rabbit holes and figure more things out. But for the purposes of today, let's talk about the hydration part first. In general, I do like the recommendation of half your body weight in ounces. It is a generally good place to start. It's pretty easy math to just cut your body weight in half and go forward. On the athletic side, I do think that leaves us quite a bit short for a lot of folks on how much water they should be consuming, especially if you're in a lot of athletic endeavors. So then we shift a little bit more towards some of the research that Jason and I have read and presented in our course, which looks more at 3 to 4 liters of water a day. Unfortunately, they don't do a lot of that research in the US. So translate liters over, you're looking at basically a gallon or a little bit less throughout the day. Pushing for that as a standard, I think, is a really good place to start. Another really nerdy way to go about this, if everybody's got their baseline set and they're consistently drinking enough water to perform well on the bike, how do we replenish what gets lost? There are people that are going to really enjoy this piece, because what you can do is literally measure your weight before you get out for your ride. I recommend doing it in pretty much as minimal clothing as possible, because when you're done with the ride, if you come back in with that clothing that's absorbed all your sweat and is sitting really heavy, the readings aren't going to be perfect. But in general, you're going to replace every pound of body weight you lose over that longer ride with 16 to 24 ounces of water. A little bit of a range, but in general, if you go out on a rip for 3 hours and you come back 5 pounds lighter, which would be a hell of a day, you need to replenish that water. So a really, really great option is just to measure yourself before, measure after, and then try to accumulate that in excess of your normal daily intake, because this is loss beyond your normal intake. Okay, so if we've established the fact that after a 3-hour ride and you're feeling really fatigued and you are bonking and going downhill, that eating a banana is not going to change that dehydrated state that you're in, we can move on. Let's talk more about the nutrition side, the food side of this. To keep things simple, I want to start with 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates every hour that you're on the bike. The only caveat to this is it does not include the first hour. So if you're only going out for a 1-hour ride, it's generally accepted that you don't have to eat on that ride. You should have enough endogenous stores of energy to be able to ride through that, and you're probably not going to see a huge performance detriment. But as soon as we step past that hour, these recommendations become more and more important. We want to consider that 30 to 60 grams is somewhat of a range. I do think it's based on intensity. I do think it's based on what your gut can handle and how used to eating while exercising you are. And you'll eventually get to a point where you figure out where your balance is. But a good place to start is 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour you're on the bike. When we go forward with this, I think the most common issue that I see, and one of the catalysts for this conversation today, is under eating when people are on the bike. Now, I think this comes in 2 categories. In general, the first category is somebody who just doesn't really understand. Either they don't prepare, they didn't know, they're in this place where they kind of think that, like, oh, I don't need that nutrition, I don't need that food while I'm riding, I feel just fine. I liken that scenario to the person who basically has 2 or 3 drinks before bed and sleeps 4 hours a night and has that rough and tough, like, dude, I feel great, I don't need sleep. Yeah, okay, buddy, that's not real. You have no idea how good you would feel if you took some of those things out or improved your current state. It's the same for these people on the bike. I think a lot of the people that ride for multiple hours, like, oh, I don't need to eat, I feel great, don't realize how good they could feel or how much better they would perform. The second camp is a group that intentionally is not doing it. And I don't think it's in any really negative space, but I think it's this entrance point to this. I often refer to cycling as a gateway drug to fitness. I think it's one of the most approachable ways that somebody can get in and find a community, find a way to move, feel active and feel good. And unfortunately, that also means we get a crowd that's trying to lose some weight. Now, I think it's a great way to do that, and I absolutely love that piece of it. But the misconception then comes in, I'm trying to burn calories. I don't want to consume them at this point. They're thinking to themselves a lot of the time, if I'm riding, I'm burning up all these calories. They see that as a positive. They're feeling really good about it. They don't want to add nutrition into that component. For these folks is when I start to break out a little bit of math, and I'm pretty conservative with this math. We talked about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates per ride. So let's just give a ballpark somewhere in the middle. Let's say that's 150 calories per hour. The average output, really conservatively on the bike, we'll call it 600 calories an hour. Let's just say right there, you're only eating around 25% of what's being burnt in that hour of training. So when people think to themselves, I don't want to eat right now, I don't want to eat in this point because I am at this point trying to burn more calories, what they're doing is basically leaving performance off the table in some ways. And what they're also missing out on is what would happen if they could go further. If they're 1 hour into a ride and they burn 600 calories and they eat 150, we're sitting in a 450 net burn on that ride. If we shift that conversation a little bit, they didn't eat at all, 600 net, that's where they're at, they're in a good spot. If we shift that a little bit and they eat that 150 calories, they eat that recommended amount because they're planning on going further, they get into hour 2 And now they're going to eat that other 150, so they're 300 in on a 1200 net. They're still going to burn more calories, but they're going to be able to actually get that distance and feel comfortable doing that distance because they ate. And I think sometimes pointing that out to people that like, we're not expecting you to eat what you burn, and if you did, it would be really uncomfortable. But in this scenario, you eating a little bit gives you enough energy to continue to pursue a longer ride, a little bit better performance on that ride, and you're actually going to get more out of it on the back end. You're going to be burning more calories. So yeah, for you, that's the win that you wanted. But in my camp, it allows me to say I'm confident with what you're doing, that you're going to be comfortable, safe. You're not going to hit a really bad energy depletion at some point on your ride and get stuck miles away from home. There's a lot of safety in that too. So I think with the first camp, we're trying to get them to at least eat in the first place, because we want them to realize that their performance is going to be so much better if they do have a little bit of nutrition on board. It's going to stave off that really big decline in energy by adding little bumps that keep it up and moving. In the second camp, we're going to say the same idea. Like, I want you to be able to stave off that really big energy depletion, but they're not necessarily worried about being tired. In fact, sometimes they look at that as being a good thing if they're really smoked and tired after that. So we're looking at them more so to say, hey, you're going to be able to burn more calories if you put a little more in. You're going to be able to go further, work harder, get a bigger output out of that little investment that you make in making yourself a little more comfortable on the bike. This starts to apply to all kinds of spaces. With any endurance activity altogether, nutrition is really, really important. But cycling, since it's such a gateway into a lot of these things, is one space that I see this a lot. So in general, this is something that, again, is not perfect. In fact, one of my favorite things that I've ever heard, I forget where I heard it first, but the idea is that no model, no framework is perfect, but some are useful. And I think when our patients come to us with questions about really nuanced topics, we're all very good at saying it depends. Unfortunately, that is a terrible answer for the patient in front of you who's looking for guidance in what could be a really successful fitness journey for them. So here's a couple of guidelines that you're going to run back through. Main thing is, you cannot eat your way through a dehydrated state. That banana is not going to touch it if you are totally fatigued. So you're either going to start with that half your body weight in ounces, or you're going to shoot for 3 to 4 liters of water a day. Those are going to be our ballparks to start with. If the person's really dialed in and they're crushing their miles and they're focusing a lot on performance, it's a great way to go about things if you measure their weight before, measure it after, replenish what you lost in that period of time. When it comes to the nutrition side, we're thinking totally energy here. The idea is 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates, simple digesting carbohydrates, every hour beyond the first hour. If they're in that window, in general, we're going to see better energy levels. For the person who's thinking about this more as part of their fitness journey to help lose some weight, you're going to give them the conversation that says, hey, a little investment in the food that you bring in now is going to make you feel better so you can go longer, so you can burn more and achieve more. For the person who's looking at this that thinks, I'm rough and tough and I feel really good already, you need to expose them to the idea of how much better could you feel? Like, you've been doing this for a while and this has been like your pace and this is your output. Let's just experiment with this. What happens if you eat a little bit? You're going to bring it to that person as a true performance benefit, and it may take a little convincing. If you're sticking to those guidelines, I think a lot of these conversations around like, how much should I eat? How much should I go through? Becomes a little more simple, and you can make people feel really confident in what they're doing. And you can kind of steer away from some of the nuanced things that they're going to find in all of these forums and educational spaces where everybody has a different opinion on it. So as far as fueling on the bike, those are some of the main guidelines I'd want you to run through. If you have any questions, definitely hit us up. Appreciate your time this morning. Thanks, y'all.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.